Hebrews. Look with me at Hebrews chapter 6. And I want to read to you from verse 17. Thus God, determining to show more abundantly to the heirs of promise were the children of Abraham. Paul would say in Galatians that the heirs of promise are people who have believed the same way Abraham believed on Jesus. So you and I are heirs. That he might show more abundantly to the heirs of promise the immutability of his counsel confirmed by an oath. This is the unchangeableness of his guaranteed oath. That God wanted you to know his counsel never changes. His oath stands forever. Whatever he tells you, take it to the bank. Amen. Whatever he promises you, it'll never end. 18, that by two immutable things, those two immutable things are his counsel and his oath. Whatever I say, whatever I do, God says you can take that to the bank. They are two immutable, two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, that we might have strong consolation who have fled for refuge to lay hold of the hope set before us. I want you to focus on a phrase that was the first 10 minutes of our sermon today. Did you catch that word? We who have fled for refuge have laid hope of the hope set before us. And so the apostle, the writer of Hebrews, writing to a Jewish people who've come out of Judaism into Christ, have in their mind the Psalms. They remember singing Psalms 46. They grew up singing Psalm 62. They grew up with the knowledge that God is my refuge and my strong tower. That when I'm in trouble and I'm a refugee, I need to go find my refuge. And the author of Hebrews drops that concept into his letter and says, it's impossible for God to lie. Those that have strong consolation are the same people who have fled for refuge to lay hold of hope. There's a hope somewhere, and us refugees have fled to find it. He's talking to a Jewish audience who completely understands what it means to be a refugee and need a strong tower. Completely understand what it means to leave in Egypt and need a promised land. That makes it make a little bit more sense for us. And so he says, God's made you a promise, God's made you a counsel, God's made you an oath, God cannot lie. He's laid in front of you refuge. Those who have, I want to make sure we make this right connection. Those of us who have a strong consolation are the same people who have fled for refuge. So those who have fled for refuge have a consolation that God's going to do something. And I want to lay out the case today for what that consolation was. Why could they be so confident that if they would leave Moses and come to Christ, they would be okay? Because that's hard. It's hard to get people to lay down what they can see, what they can hear, what they can smell, what they can feel, and what they can taste for something they can't. Right. Really hard. Amen. It's why in our version, 21st century version of mixture, we have encountered, it's hard to get people to lay down their good works, which they can see and touch, and give those up so that they can just receive favor by faith, and they can't touch that. That's hard. It probably isn't as hard as giving up killing a lamb, but maybe. Maybe, because we're pretty in love with our ability to do. We get pretty infatuated by our Bible reading and our fasting and our attending and our giving and our going and our doing and our witnessing and our t-shirt wearing and our bumper sticker buying and all the other stuff that we do that shows people who we are in Christ. And that mixture's hard to get rid of. But laying all this as a foundation, here's how the Jewish mind worked. Not only did they have the songs from Psalm 46 and Psalm 62, they had something else. Way back in Numbers, God told, and I won't turn you to Numbers. I'm going to turn you to a different passage to show you that in a nutshell, because sometimes the Bible repeats itself with fewer words. I'll go to the repeat, okay? That's why you have Chronicles. You have 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles. Chronicles is telling you all the stuff 1st, 2nd Samuel, and 1st, 2nd Kings tried to tell you. It took them 4 books. Chronicles does it in 2. Sometimes the sum up is a little easier to read. So I'll take you to the sum up in a moment. But in the book of Numbers, God told Moses, when you get to the promised land, now I want to take my time right here because this is very unfamiliar to a lot of New Testament believers, okay? If I stood up here and told you Daniel in the lion's den, you could zone out for half of it and still get the story right. You know, if I talked about the ark, you could kind of play on Facebook for the first 2 minutes, come back and realize the world's about to get flooded. But this next story, a lot of us haven't read this in a long time. In the book of Numbers, God said, Moses, when you get to the promised land, here's what I want you to do. I want you to build 6 cities. I want you to build 3 on one side of the Jordan, and I want you to build 3 on the other side of the Jordan. And those cities are going to be called cities of refuge. Now, Joshua chapter 20 is the retelling of the cities of refuge, because Joshua has now crossed the Jordan and they're going to start building these cities, the cities that they had abandoned, the cities they had been told to build by God in the book of Numbers. Joshua chapter 20 verse 1, the Lord spoke to Joshua and said, "Speak to the children of Israel, saying, appoint or designate for yourselves cities of refuge, of which I spoke to you through Moses." Okay, that's what we just told you about. Here's what's going to look like. That the slayer who kills a person accidentally or unintentionally may flee there, and they shall be your refuge from the avenger of blood. And when he flees to one of those cities and stands at the entrance of the gate of the city and declares his case in the hearing of the elders of the city, they shall take him into the city as one of them and give him a place that he may dwell among them. Then, if the avenger of blood pursues him, they shall not deliver the slayer into his hand, because he struck his neighbor unintentionally and did not hate him. Stay right here on this verse for a moment. He did not hate him beforehand. Let me recap real quick. I think the text reads real smooth. It kind of reads for itself, so I don't want to interfere. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. God tells Joshua it's time to build those refuge cities, and here's why I want you to build them. Because sometimes, this was an entirely different culture than we live in, I've never worried about killing somebody accidentally. Have you? I mean, I'll wake up in the morning and go, God help me today not to accidentally murder someone. But that was a much bigger deal in a world far more violent with far shorter lifespans, where everyone worked with their hands, and there was a lot of pioneer work going on. All right. And so in pioneer work, you're going to have an opportunity for things to swing the wrong way and fall when they shouldn't fall, and things to happen that you didn't expect were going to happen, and people were losing their lives. A lot of that happened in North America as we moved west. We saw a lot of those exact same things. And so you're living in a world in which they're going into the promised land, and there's all kinds of things happening. And God says to Joshua, I want you to build refuge cities so that if a man accidentally or unintentionally kills a man that he did not hate, he did not have an ought against, he did not have a fight with, he did not have a problem with, that this man can flee the scene of the crime and run to one of the refuge cities. And when he gets to the city, here's what he does first. He has to stop at the gate and meet the city elders. The city elders always sat at the city gate pronouncing judgments on whatever was going on in and out of the city. He stops at the city gate and he tells the elders what he did. Here's my name, here's where I'm from, here's what I've done. I declare myself a refugee inside of this refugee city. I want you to sanctuary me. Okay? And according to the text, if the avenger of blood pursues him, the avenger of blood would have been the next of kin to whoever just got killed accidentally. So you found out your brother just was killed by this guy. You don't know the details, but in that world, see, in this world today, if you take off after the guy that kills your brother, you're going to jail. You better let the law do its job. We're not living in that day in Joshua. We're not living in this day in Joshua. And so there was, how many of you realize that the old covenant was eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, life for a life? So if you killed someone, what was going to happen to you? You're going to die. Somebody's going to find you and kill you. That was the way it was. You're not living in turn the other cheek era of grace, forgiveness for all. You're living in, you did it, you're going to pay for it. And so because you're living in that era, you need a place, because you didn't do this intentionally. This wasn't maliciousness in your heart, but that doesn't matter, because the next of kin is an avenger of blood, and he doesn't want your story. Right? He doesn't need your story. Oh, it was an accident. I didn't mean to do it. I didn't hate. I don't care. You're going to die because I have the right to kill you. That was actually the world in which they lived. And so God said, I don't want you to have to run. I want you to be able to find sanctuary. I want you to be able to find shelter. And so God declares these sanctuary cities.